The day my parents handed my sister the keys, they didn't even look at me. Rent somewhere, my mother said, like she was suggesting coffee, not rewriting my entire future. I smiled. I nodded. I swallowed everything burning inside my chest. My name is Savannah Pierce, and I learned something that day I will never forget. Love in my family was always conditional, and I was never the condition worth choosing. We were standing in front of a brand new suburban house, balloons tied to the mailbox, my sister Claire glowing, like she had earned it. But I knew the truth. The down payment, the furniture, even the closing costs, every dollar came from my parents. They called it support. I called it favoritism dressed in polite language. When I asked, carefully, quietly, what about me, my father didn't hesitate. You're independent, Savannah. You'll figure it out. Independent. It sounded like a compliment. It felt like abandonment. That night, I went back to my tiny apartment, sat on the floor, and opened my savings account. Every overtime shift, every sacrifice, every dollar stared back at me. And instead of breaking, I made a decision. I wouldn't ask them for anything ever again. I would build something they couldn't take credit for. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was upset, because something inside me had shifted, quietly but permanently. I stopped wanting their approval. I started wanting control. The next morning, I called a real estate agent with a voice so steady it surprised even me. I didn't tell her my story. I didn't need sympathy. I needed numbers, listings, possibilities. Within hours, I was touring places most people overlooked, small, worn, slightly neglected properties that felt more honest than anything my parents had ever given. The first house I bought wasn't beautiful. The floors creaked, the paint peeled, and the kitchen smelled faintly like time had forgotten it. But it was mine. Entirely mine. I remember signing the papers, my hand trembling, not with fear, but with something sharper. Ownership. Independence. Power. While my sister posted smiling photos in her perfect home, I spent nights scrubbing floors, watching tutorials, learning everything from plumbing basics to negotiation tactics. It wasn't glamorous. It was exhausting. But every improvement I made added value, real, measurable value. Months later, I sold that first property for a profit. Not a miracle. Not luck. Proof. And standing there with that check in my hand, I realized something dangerous. I was just getting started. I didn't celebrate the profit. I reinvested it. That became my rule. No distractions, no rewards, no looking back. Every dollar had a purpose, and that purpose was growth. I bought another property, then another, each one slightly better. Each deal a little sharper. I learned how to read people the way others read contracts. I stopped hesitating. I stopped doubting. Meanwhile, my family stayed exactly the same. My sister Claire still posted curated happiness online. My parents still praised her like she was the blueprint for success. They never asked what I was doing. Not once. At first it stung. Then it became fuel. I built quietly. No announcements. No validation. Just results. Years passed, and my portfolio grew into something I never imagined. Multiple properties, steady income, a system that worked even when I slept. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was operating. Then came the call. My father's name flashed on my screen after months of silence. I almost didn't answer. Savannah, he said, his voice unusually careful. We were thinking, maybe it's time you come back home. We need to talk. Need. Not want. Need. And for the first time in my life, I heard something I had never heard from him before. Uncertainty. I didn't go home immediately. I made him wait. Not out of spite. Out of clarity. For years, I had been the one waiting for scraps of attention, for acknowledgement, for a place at their table that never felt like mine. Now, for the first time, the roles had shifted. When I finally drove up to that same house, the one they had gifted Claire, it looked smaller than I remembered. Less impressive. Almost fragile. My mother opened the door, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. My father stood behind her, hands clasped like he was negotiating something invisible. And Claire, she avoided looking at me entirely. That's when I knew. This wasn't a reunion. This was a problem. We sat in the living room, the same place they had once celebrated her success, and my father cleared his throat. "We're in a bit of a situation," he admitted, choosing his words carefully, like stepping around broken glass.
"Debt.
Bad investments. A mortgage they couldn't keep up with." And then he said it. "We thought maybe you could help." Help. The word hung in the air like a test. And I realized something in that moment. They finally saw my value, but not my worth. I let the silence stretch longer than it was comfortable. Not to punish them, though a part of me wanted to, but to understand exactly what they were asking without dressing it up as something softer. My father shifted in his seat. My mother kept smoothing imaginary wrinkles from her dress, and Claire stared at her hands like answers might appear there. "How much?" I asked finally. The number he said didn't shock me. What shocked me was how casually he said it, like I was still the daughter who would bend without question. Like nothing had changed. I leaned back, studying them the way I now studied every deal, carefully, objectively, without emotion clouding judgment. "What exactly are you offering in return?" I asked. That's when my mother frowned. "Savannah, this is family."
No.
This was business. And they had just made that clear. Claire finally looked up, her voice tight. "We wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious." I believed her. I just didn't care in the way they expected me to, because something had shifted in me long before this moment. I wasn't the girl who needed them anymore. And if they wanted something from me now, they were going to have to earn it. I stood up slowly, letting the weight of my decisions settle before I spoke. "I can help," I said, and 3 sets of eyes lifted with instant relief. But not like this. Confusion replaced gratitude almost immediately. "I don't give money," I continued. "I invest." My father's expression tightened. "Savannah, this is your family's home." "No," I corrected gently. "It's an asset you can't afford." The room went still. I pulled a folder from my bag, already prepared. Numbers, projections, legal structures, everything laid out with precision. I had anticipated this moment the second he said we need. "I'll buy the house," I said. "At market-adjusted value. You clear your debt. You stay here as tenants." My mother's face drained of color. Claire looked like I had just rewritten reality. "Tenants," she whispered.
"Yes."
"With a formal lease. Fair terms. No exceptions." My father stood up, anger flickering beneath his restraint. "You want us to pay you to live in our own home?" I met his gaze without blinking. "You wanted me to rent somewhere," I said quietly. "This is somewhere." The words landed harder than I expected, and for the first time, they understood exactly who I had become. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, suffocating, thick with everything none of us had ever said out loud. Claire was the first to break. "This is insane," she snapped, standing abruptly. "You're turning this into a transaction like we're strangers." I didn't react. I couldn't afford to. "We became strangers the day I stopped matching," I said evenly. My mother flinched, but didn't deny it. My father paced once, twice, like he was searching for the version of me he used to control. "There has to be another way." "There was," I replied. "Years ago." That landed harder than anything else, because it was true. I hadn't just built properties, I had built boundaries. And they didn't know how to cross them anymore. Claire's voice softened, but not with kindness, with desperation. "You'd really make us sign a lease?" I held her gaze. "I'd give you stability," I said. "Something no one ever gave me." That's when my father stopped pacing. He looked at me, not as his daughter, not as someone beneath him, but as something unfamiliar. An equal, or worse. And then slowly he nodded. Not in agreement, in surrender. And everything inside me shifted again. The contracts were signed 2 days later. No celebration, no hugs, just ink drying on paper that finally told the truth about who we were to each other. I paid off their debts exactly as promised. The house transferred into my name without complications. And just like that, the place they once handed to Claire became another line in my portfolio. But I didn't feel powerful. I felt clear. Weeks passed, and something unexpected happened. They followed the lease. Every payment arrived on time. Every term respected. My mother stopped calling me, with guilt wrapped in softness. My father stopped offering advice I never asked for. Even Claire changed, quieter, more careful, like she was finally aware of the ground beneath her feet. Not love, respect. Earned, not given. One evening, I drove past the house and didn't stop. I didn't need to. There was nothing left there for me to claim, because I had already taken back everything that mattered. My worth, my voice, my future. They once told me to rent somewhere like I didn't belong. So I built a world where I owned every space I stood in. And when my father asked me, months later, which house is yours now? I smiled. All of them.